A chronicle of Micron technology. In the grand, often turbulent narrative of the global semiconductor industry, the existence of Micron technology is a defiance of probability. The geography of the digital revolution is typically mapped to the sun-drenched valleys of Northern California, the neon-lit districts of Tokyo, or the sprawling industrial parks of Seoul and Hsinchu. It is not supposed to be rooted in the high desert of Boise, Idaho, a region historically defined by the agrarian rhythms of potato farming and cattle ranching, rather than the nanometer-scale precision of silicon lithography. Yet it is here, amidst the sagebrush and the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, that the United States' last remaining manufacturer of dynamic random access memory, DRAM, stands as a fortress of American industrial resilience. The history of Micron is not merely a corporate biography. It is a microcosm of the American economic experience over the last half-century. It is a story that encompasses the scrappy, basement-level entrepreneurialism of the 1970s, the brutal trade wars with Japan in the 1980s, the consolidation and financial engineering of the 1990s, and the fierce legal and technological battles for standardization that defined the new millennium. It is a saga populated by colorful characters, twin brothers with a vision for circuit design, a billionaire potato farmer with a gambler's instinct, and a stunt pilot CEO who treated the volatility of the memory market with the same adrenaline-fueled stoicism he brought to air shows. To understand Micron is to understand the nature of memory itself. Unlike the logic processors made by companies like Intel or NVIDIA, which are often proprietary, high-margin, and distinct, memory chips are commodities. They are the crude oil of the information age, traded in massive volumes, subject to ferocious boom and bust cycles, and priced according to the ruthless laws of global supply and demand. In this environment, survival is not guaranteed by innovation alone. It requires a manufacturing efficiency bordering on obsession and a corporate constitution capable of weathering billion-dollar losses in pursuit of the next cyclical upturn. This first part of this review details how a small consulting firm in a dentist's basement grew into a geopolitical titan, navigating technological shifts and trade disputes to power the artificial intelligence era. Genesis, Potato King, 1978 to 1980. The seed of Micron technology was planted in the fertile but unlikely soil of Boise, Idaho, on October 5, 1978. The late 1970s were a period of ferment in the electronics industry. The personal computer was transitioning from a hobbyist curiosity to a consumer appliance, and the demand for digital memory was beginning its exponential climb. However, the founding team of Micron did not initially intend to manufacture chips. Ward Parkinson, a brilliant design engineer with experience at Mostech Corporation, joined forces with his twin brother Joe Parkinson, a lawyer, along with colleagues Dennis Wilson and Doug Pittman, to form a semiconductor design consulting firm. Operating out of the basement of a dental office, a setting that has since become part of the company's lore, the team secured their first major contract with Mostech Corporation, a Texas-based semiconductor leader. Their task was to design a 64K DRAM chip, the cutting-edge standard of the day. The 64K designation referred to the chip's ability to store approximately 64,000 bits of data, a capacity that, while microscopic by modern standards, was sufficient to power the early home computers that were beginning to appear in American living rooms. The consulting model seemed safe and sensible, leveraging Ward's engineering prowess without requiring the massive capital expenditure of a manufacturing facility. But the volatility that would come to define Micron's future struck early. Mostech was acquired by United Technologies, and in the ensuing corporate restructuring, the 64K design contract was canceled. Suddenly, the Parkinsons were left with a world-class chip design, but no customer to buy it. Faced with the dissolution of their primary revenue stream, the founders made a pivot that was as audacious as it was desperate. They decided to manufacture the chip themselves. This decision defied all conventional business logic of the time. Semiconductor manufacturing, or fabrication, is one of the most capital-intensive endeavors on Earth, requiring dust-free clean rooms, expensive photolithography steppers, and hazardous chemical supply chains. To compete with established giants like Texas Instruments, Motorola, and the rising Japanese conglomerates, Micron needed capital, far more than a small consultancy in Idaho could generate. The search for funding led the Parkinsons to a man who was the antithesis of the stereotypical tech investor, John Richard J.R. Simplot. Simplot was an Idaho institution, a self-made billionaire who had dropped out of school in the 8th grade at age 14 after a quarrel with his father, striking out on his own with nothing but a few gold coins. He had built an agricultural empire by revolutionizing the potato industry. Simplot's fortune was built on a foundation of practical innovation and grit. During World War II, he had made millions supplying dehydrated potatoes and onions to the U.S. military. In the post-war era, his company developed the first commercially viable process for freezing French fries. This breakthrough led to a legendary handshake deal with Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, in 1967. By 1972, Simplot was supplying frozen fries to every McDonald's in the growing chain, effectively fueling the fast food revolution. When Ward and Joe Parkinson approached Simplot in 1980, they were pitching a technology that was invisible to the naked eye, vastly different from the tangible commodities of cattle, fertilizer, and tubers that Simplot understood. Yet Simplot possessed a keen eye for efficiency and a willingness to bet on local talent. He famously remarked on the evolution of his own business philosophy. "When I started, I hired them for brawn. Today, we're after brains." He saw in the Parkinsons a reflection of his own youthful tenacity. Despite the skepticism of his own financial advisors, Simplot invested $1 million in the fledgling company in exchange for a 40% stake. This was not merely a financial transaction, it was a cultural infusion. Simplot's involvement tethered Micron to the deep pockets and patient capital of the Idaho agricultural aristocracy. Unlike venture capitalists who might demand a quick exit, Simplot was accustomed to the seasons of farming, a mindset that proved surprisingly applicable to the cyclical nature of semiconductors. His investment funded the construction of Fab 1, Micron's first manufacturing facility, which broke ground along Federal Way in Boise. Simplot's influence on Micron extended beyond the checkbook. He was a colorful, maverick figure whose eccentricities became part of the company's identity. He was known for driving a Lincoln Continental with license plates that read Mr. Spud, and for his deep involvement in the community, including funding the reintroduction of peregrine falcons to Idaho. In a symbolic convergence of nature and industry, a pair of these falcons eventually nested in a box on the ledge of the J.R. Simplot corporate offices in downtown Boise. This blend of rugged individualism, agricultural wealth, and high-tech ambition created a corporate culture at Micron that was distinct from the polished, Stanford-educated elitism of Silicon Valley. It was a culture that valued frugality, loyalty, and a willingness to fight against the odds. David of DRAM, 1981 through 1985. In 1981, Fab 1 roared to life, and Micron shipped its first 64K DRAM chips. The timing was precarious. The American semiconductor industry was under siege. Japanese conglomerates Toshiba, Hitachi, NEC, Fujitsu were aggressively expanding their market share, supported by the Japanese government's Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI. These companies were producing high-quality memory chips at volumes that American firms struggled to match, leading to a crisis of confidence in U.S. manufacturing. Micron's survival strategy was predicated on engineering efficiency. Ward Parkinson and his team knew they could not outspend the Japanese on equipment, so they had to outdesign them. They focused on reducing the die size, the physical surface area of the silicon chip. In semiconductor economics, a smaller die is the holy grail. It allows a manufacturer to print more chips on a single silicon wafer, thereby lowering the cost per unit and increasing the yield per batch. In 1981, Micron's engineers finalized a design for the 64K DRAM that was significantly smaller than the industry standard. By 1983, they had achieved a shrink, reducing the chip size to 22,000 square mils. This was a technological coup. Micron's chips were smaller and therefore cheaper to make than those of giants like Motorola and Texas Instruments. This cost advantage allowed Micron to compete on price without bleeding cash as quickly as its rivals. The company found eager customers in the exploding home computer market. The Commodore 64, released in 1982, became the best-selling single computer model of all time, and its 64 kilobytes of memory were frequently supplied by Micron. This demand fueled Micron's early growth, leading to a successful initial public offering in June 1984. The IPO raised critical funds for expansion and signaled that the potato farmer's bet was paying off. The euphoria of the IPO was extinguished almost immediately by the brutal realities of the semiconductor cycle. In 1985, the memory market collapsed. The industry had built too much capacity in anticipation of demand that didn't materialize fast enough, a phenomenon economists call the hog cycle, named after the cyclical nature of pork prices. Complicating matters was the relentless production from Japanese fabs, which continued to flood the global market with DRAM despite falling prices. The price of a memory chip plummeted from dollars to pennies. For American manufacturers, the 1985 crash was an extinction-level event. Intel, the company that had invented the DRAM in 1968, famously decided to abandon the memory market entirely in 1985. Intel CEO Andy Grove and Chairman Gordon Moore concluded that they could not compete with the Japanese in a commodity market and pivoted the company entirely toward microprocessors. Other American firms followed suit. Mostek, Micron's original client, was sold and eventually dismantled. National Semiconductor, AMD, and others retreated from the DRAM space. By the end of 1985, Micron was one of the last American companies standing in the DRAM arena. It was hemorrhaging money, its stock price had collapsed, and layoffs were decimating the workforce. The podunk company, as one analyst called it, seemed destined for the history books. Trade wars and legal warfare, 1985 to 1990. Facing existential ruin, Micron's leadership decided that they were not losing because of inefficiency, but because the game was rigged. They argued that Japanese companies were engaging in dumping, selling chips in the US market at prices below the cost of production to drive American competitors out of business, with the intention of raising prices once they achieved a monopoly. In 1985, Micron, alongside the Semiconductor Industry Association, SIA, filed an anti-dumping petition with the U.S. Department of Commerce and the International Trade Commission, ITC. This was a bold, aggressive move. Joe Parkinson, leveraging his legal background, spearheaded a lobbying effort that framed the survival of the U.S. DRAM industry as a matter of national security. The argument was that if the U.S. lost its ability to manufacture memory chips, it would become dependent on foreign powers for the oil of the information age, compromising everything from consumer electronics to advanced weaponry. The legal battle was intense. Micron's lawyers provided evidence that Japanese firms were cross-subsidizing their memory losses with profits from their consumer electronics divisions, TVs, VCRs, and were supported by low-interest loans from affiliated banks, the Keietsu system. The Reagan administration, which was increasingly sensitive to the ballooning trade deficit with Japan, was receptive. The lobbying paid off. In September 1986, the United States and Japan signed the U.S.-Japan Semiconductor Agreement. This landmark trade pact halted the dumping by establishing foreign market values, FMVs, for chips, essentially a price floor below which Japanese chips could not be sold in the U.S. Additionally, the agreement set a target for foreign, i.e. U.S. companies, to capture 20% of the Japanese semiconductor market within 5 years. The agreement was controversial. Free market purists decried it as protectionism that artificially inflated prices for American computer makers. Indeed, companies like Apple and IBM saw their component costs rise. However, for Micron, it was a lifeline. The price floor stopped the bleeding, allowing the company to return to profitability as the market stabilized. This victory reinforced a core tenet of the Micron culture: the willingness to use litigation and government policy as strategic weapons. Micron had learned that in the global chip wars, lawyers were as important as engineers. As Micron emerged from the trade wars, a new leader began to ascend through its ranks, embodying the company's rugged, risk-taking ethos. Steve Appleton had joined Micron in 1983 as a 23-year-old production laborer on the night shift. A graduate of Boise State University, Appleton was a former professional tennis player with a relentless drive. Appleton was not a typical executive. He worked his way up from the fab floor to management by mastering the intricacies of the manufacturing process. He was known for his high-octane hobbies, which included off-road racing, scuba diving, and most notably, stunt piloting. His rise was meteoric. In 1991, at the age of 31, he was named President and Operating Officer. By 1994, following the retirement of Joe Parkinson, Appleton became the Chairman and CEO of Micron Technology. Appleton's leadership style was defined by a junkyard dog mentality. He cemented a culture of extreme frugality and operational efficiency. Micron famously reused chemicals, pushed its equipment longer than competitors, and maintained a flat organizational structure where decision-making was rapid. Appleton believed that the memory business, with its violent cycles, required leaders who were comfortable with extreme risk, a philosophy he lived personally and professionally. Great Consolidation and the TI Deal, 1990 to 2000. The 1990s brought a renewed boom in memory demand, driven by the ubiquity of the personal computer and the internet revolution. However, the competitive landscape had shifted. As the Japanese threat receded following the bursting of Japan's asset bubble, a new challenger emerged: South Korea. Conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, now SK Hynix, and LG Semicon entered the DRAM market with massive scale, replicating the Japanese strategy of high-volume, low-cost production. The market became a three-front war between the Americans, led by Micron, the Japanese, and the Koreans. Prices continued to be volatile. In this environment, scale was the only defense. Small producers could not afford the multi-billion-dollar price tags of new fabrication plants. In 1998, amidst the Asian financial crisis, which depressed demand and cratered chip prices, Micron executed a transformative strategic maneuver. Texas Instruments, the storied American innovator, had been struggling to make its memory business profitable. TI's leadership wanted to exit the volatile commodity market to focus on high-margin digital signal processors for the booming mobile phone industry. On June 19, 1998, Micron agreed to acquire TI's worldwide memory operations. The deal was a masterclass in financial engineering. Micron did not pay cash, which was scarce during the downturn. Instead, it issued approximately 28.9 million shares of stock and convertible notes to TI. In a remarkable twist that underscored TI's desperation to exit, TI agreed to provide Micron with $750 million in low-interest financing to help upgrade the facilities Micron was acquiring. Furthermore, Micron assumed $190 million in government-sponsored debt associated with TI's fabrication plant in Avezzano, Italy. This acquisition was a watershed moment. Overnight, Micron tripled its manufacturing capacity and gained a truly global footprint, acquiring fabs in Texas, Italy, and Singapore, as well as TI's stake in the KTI Semiconductor joint venture in Japan. It solidified Micron's position as a Tier 1 global player, capable of matching the scale of Samsung. The deal also marked the definitive end of TI's involvement in the market it had helped create, leaving Micron as the sole standard-bearer of American DRAM. During the 1990s, Micron also experimented with vertical integration. In 1991, it launched a subsidiary called Edge Technology, later known as Micron Electronics and then MPC, to sell personal computers directly to consumers. For a time, Micron PC was a significant player, competing with Dell and Gateway in the direct mail computer market. The logic was to create a guaranteed customer for Micron's memory chips. However, the PC assembly business was characterized by razor-thin margins and fierce competition. It increasingly distracted management focus from the core semiconductor business. In the early 2000s, recognizing that the synergies were overstated, Micron spun off and eventually sold its PC operations, refocusing entirely on chip design and manufacturing. Standards Wars. RDRAM versus DDR, 1996 through 2003. As the 1990s closed, the industry faced a technical bottleneck. Microprocessors from Intel and AMD were increasing in speed exponentially, the gigahertz race, but the memory chips that fed them data were lagging behind. A new standard was needed to bridge this gap. Two competing technologies emerged, sparking a religious war that would divide the industry. On one side was Rambus DRAM, RDRAM. Developed by Rambus Inc., a company that specialized in intellectual property rather than manufacturing, RDRAM was a revolutionary architecture. It used a narrow, high-speed serial interface that promised immense bandwidth. Intel, the kingmaker of the PC industry, threw its weight behind Rambus, signing a pact in 1996 to make RDRAM the exclusive standard for its upcoming Pentium 4 processors. On the other side was double data rate DDR SDRAM. Championed by Micron and other memory manufacturers, DDR was an evolutionary approach. It retained the wide parallel interface of traditional SDRAM, but doubled the data transfer rate by reading data on both the rising and falling edges of the clock signal. Micron viewed RDRAM as an existential threat. RDRAM was proprietary, meaning manufacturers would have to pay significant royalties to Rambus Inc. for every chip they sold. It also required expensive retooling of fabrication plants and ran hotter than traditional memory, requiring heat spreaders. Furthermore, technical analyses suggested that RDRAM's high latency, the time it takes to initiate a data transfer, negated its bandwidth advantages in many real-world applications. Micron, along with other manufacturers, rebelled against the Intel-Rambus alliance. They rallied around the open JEDEC standard of DDR, which was royalty-free and cheaper to produce. The war was fought in the marketplace and in the engineering labs. When the Pentium 4 launched with RDRAM in 2000, consumers and system builders balked at the exorbitant price of the memory modules. Performance benchmarks showed that DDR systems were often just as fast, if not faster, due to lower latency. The market voted with its wallet. Intel was forced to capitulate. In 2001, Intel introduced chipsets that supported DDR, effectively conceding defeat. DDR became the ubiquitous standard for the next 2 decades, evolving into the DDR5 memory used in modern supercomputers. Micron's gamble on the open standard had paid off, saving the industry billions in royalties. Legal quagmire and the Amnesty maneuver, 2002 to 2013. The defeat of RDRAM in the marketplace did not end the conflict, it merely shifted it to the courtroom. Rambus Inc. launched a barrage of lawsuits against Micron, Hynix, Infineon, and Samsung, claiming that their DDR products infringed on Rambus patents. Micron countersued, alleging fraud. Micron's lawyers argued that Rambus had participated in the JEDEC standard-setting organization in the early 90s, while secretly filing patents on the very technologies that JEDEC was adopting as open standards, a strategy described in internal Rambus emails as creating a patent minefield. Micron accused Rambus of a patent ambush, deceiving the industry to lock them into a standard they would later tax. The litigation dragged on for over a decade, involving allegations of document destruction, spoliation, by Rambus, who had hosted shredding parties to eliminate evidence. The legal battles were fierce and expensive, ping-ponging between district courts and federal appeals courts. Finally, in 2013, Micron and Rambus reached a settlement. Micron agreed to pay up to $280 million in royalties over 7 years, a significant sum, but a fraction of the billions Rambus had originally sought. While fighting Rambus, Micron became embroiled in an even darker controversy. In 2002, the U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, launched an investigation into a global conspiracy to fix the price of DRAM. The DOJ alleged that major memory manufacturers had colluded to artificially inflate prices during the dot-com bust of 2001, harming consumers and computer makers like Dell and HP. Facing the prospect of a crippling criminal fine, Micron made a calculated strategic decision. Under the DOJ's corporate leniency program, the first member of a cartel to come forward, admit guilt, and cooperate with investigators receives amnesty from criminal prosecution. Micron blew the whistle. In 2002, the company admitted that its employees had communicated with competitors to coordinate pricing. One Micron executive, Alfred Sensulo, eventually agreed to plead guilty to obstruction of justice for altering notes and concealing documents related to these communications. By turning state's evidence, Micron avoided the massive criminal fines that decimated its rivals. Samsung, Hynix, Infineon, and Elpida were forced to plead guilty and pay a combined total of over $730 million in fines, one of the largest antitrust settlements in history at the time. While the ethics of the maneuver were debated, the result was undeniable. Micron protected its balance sheet while its competitors were financially penalized, further strengthening its relative market position. Great consolidation continues, 2002 to 2012. In the early 2000s, Steve Appleton sought to further consolidate the industry by acquiring Hynix, the South Korean giant that was teetering on bankruptcy. In 2002, Micron proposed a deal valued at nearly $3 billion. It was a bold attempt to create a memory superpower. However, the deal collapsed due to fierce opposition from Hynix's labor unions and creditors, who believed the price was too low. Hynix was eventually bailed out by its creditors and survived, remaining Micron's fiercest competitor alongside Samsung. Undeterred, Micron continued to hunt for assets. In 2008, Qimonda, a German memory manufacturer spun out of Infineon, filed for insolvency. Micron moved quickly to acquire Qimonda's stake in Inotera Memories, a Taiwanese joint venture. For approximately $400 million, Micron gained access to state-of-the-art 300mm fabrication capacity in Taiwan. This deal deepened Micron's manufacturing presence in Asia, a critical necessity as the center of gravity for electronic supply chains shifted to the Pacific Rim. By 2010, the memory market was changing. The rise of the smartphone and the iPod created an insatiable demand for NAND flash, non-volatile memory that retains data when power is turned off. Micron realized that relying solely on DRAM was too risky. In 2010, Micron acquired Mnemonix, a joint venture between Intel and ST Microelectronics, in an all-stock deal valued at $1.27 billion. Mnemonix was the market leader in NOR flash, used for code storage in mobile phones, and had a promising portfolio of phase change memory technology. The acquisition was strategic on multiple levels. It gave Micron a complete portfolio of memory products: DRAM, NAND, and NOR. It also brought hope for PCM, a theoretical universal memory that combined the speed of DRAM with the non-volatility of flash. While PCM ultimately struggled to achieve commercial scale and was later de-emphasized, the Mnemonix deal successfully diversified Micron's revenue base, reducing its exposure to the wild swings of the DRAM market. Tragedy and Transition, 2012. The trajectory of Micron was irrevocably altered on the morning of February 3, 2012. Steve Appleton, the 51-year-old CEO who had defined the company for 2 decades, arrived at the Boise airport to fly his experimental Landcar 4TP, a high-performance turboprop aircraft known for its speed but also its unforgiving handling characteristics. The Landcar 4TP had a high wing loading, meaning it required high speeds to stay aloft, and had aggressive stall characteristics. Appleton, an experienced pilot who had survived a serious crash in a stunt plane in 2004 that left him with a punctured lung and broken bones, was attempting a second takeoff after aborting an initial run due to technical concerns. According to the National Transportation Safety Board report, moments after lifting off, the aircraft lost engine power at an altitude of roughly 300 feet. Investigators later found significant corrosion in the fuel control unit of the engine. Faced with a critical power loss, Appleton attempted to turn back to the runway, a maneuver pilots call the impossible turn, because of the high risk of stalling. The aircraft stalled, banked sharply, and crashed into the ground, killing Appleton instantly. Appleton's death left a void at the heart of the company. The board turned to Mark Durcan, the company's president and chief operating officer. In a twist of fate worthy of a novel, Durcan had announced his retirement just 1 week prior to the crash, intending to leave the company in August 2012. Faced with the crisis, Durcan shelved his retirement plans. He accepted the role of CEO, providing a steady hand and continuity during a period of immense grief and uncertainty. Durcan, a chemical engineer by training who had joined Micron in 1984, was less of a maverick than Appleton, but possessed a deep strategic vision. His tenure would be defined by the final crowning achievement of the industry's consolidation. The history of the semiconductor memory industry has traditionally been written in the ink of boom and bust cycles, a volatile narrative dictated by the ruthless economics of supply and demand. For decades, the production of dynamic random access memory, DRAM, and NAND flash memory was viewed through the lens of commoditization, a race to the bottom where manufacturers produced interchangeable components, battling for market share until prices collapsed, weaker players exited, and the cycle reset. In this unforgiving landscape, Micron Technology, headquartered in Boise, Idaho, was often seen as a scrappy survivor, the last American memory manufacturer standing in a field littered with the residues of former giants like Mostech, Texas Instruments, and Intel's exited memory divisions. However, the period from 2013 to the present marks a fundamental rupture in this historical continuity. Micron Technology's trajectory over the last decade is not merely a story of corporate survival or cyclical recovery. It is a chronicle of profound institutional metamorphosis. No longer just a manufacturer of digital storage, Micron has evolved into a strategic geopolitical asset, a linchpin in the global artificial intelligence infrastructure, and a central figure in the United States' effort to secure technological sovereignty in the 21st century. This transformation has occurred against a backdrop of intensifying great power competition, where the control of silicon supply chains has become as critical to national security as the control of oil shipping lanes was in the 20th century. This second part offers an exhaustive analysis of Micron's evolution, tracing the strategic decisions, technological breakthroughs, and geopolitical conflicts that have shaped the company's modern identity. From the consolidation of the industry through the acquisition of Elpida memory, to the high-stakes divorce from Intel, the battle against state-sponsored industrial espionage, and the pivot to the AI-driven supercycle, Micron's journey reflects the broader shifts in the global economy. By dissecting the granular details of its technological roadmap, from the failure of 3D XPoint to the triumph of high-bandwidth memory HBM3E, and analyzing its maneuvering through the minefield of US-China trade relations, we reveal how a company once defined by cost-per-bit economics became the fortress of the American semiconductor landscape. Elpida acquisition and the restructuring of the global order, 2013 to 2015. To understand Micron's modern era, one must first revisit the chaotic state of the DRAM industry in the early 2010s. The market was fragmented, characterized by a destructive bloodbath of competition that had driven pricing below the cost of production for many manufacturers. The industry was plagued by oversupply, with players in Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and the United States engaging in capital expenditure wars that destroyed profitability. It was within this environment of financial attrition that Micron Technology executed the most consequential strategic maneuver in its history: the acquisition of the bankrupt Japanese memory manufacturer Elpida Memory. The transaction, finalized in July 2013, was far more than a simple expansion of manufacturing capacity. It was the catalyst for a structural revolution in the global memory market. By absorbing Elpida, Micron effectively consolidated the DRAM industry into an oligopoly dominated by three major powers: Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, and Micron itself. This Big Three structure introduced a new era of discipline to the market, reducing the number of suppliers fighting for contracts and allowing for more rational control over supply growth, a stability that would prove essential for the massive R&D investments required in the coming decade. The financial architecture of the Elpida deal was complex and reflective of the distressed nature of the asset. The total value of the transaction was approximately $2 billion, a sum that appears modest in retrospect, but was significant at the time, given Micron's own financial position. The structure included an upfront payment of roughly $750 million to acquire Elpida's equity and assets, while the remaining $2.5 billion was allocated to settle creditor claims, to be paid in installments through 2019, using the cash flows generated by the acquired fabs themselves. This structure minimized the immediate strain on Micron's balance sheet while securing massive industrial assets. In conjunction with the Elpida purchase, Micron also moved to consolidate the Taiwanese supply chain. The company acquired a 24% ownership interest in Rexchip Electronics, a manufacturing joint venture between PowerChip and Elpida, for approximately $334 million. Because Elpida already owned roughly 65% of Rexchip, this additional purchase gave Micron an 89% controlling interest in the Taiwanese entity. The result was an immediate 45% increase in Micron's total wafer manufacturing capacity, granting it control of Elpida's state-of-the-art 300mm wafer fabrication facility in Hiroshima, Japan, and the Rexchip facility in Taichung, Taiwan. While the acquisition of fabrication plants provided the raw capacity Micron needed, the true strategic value of the Elpida deal lay in the customer relationships that came attached to the silicon. Prior to 2013, Micron was viewed primarily as a supplier to the PC and enterprise server markets, with less than 10% of its revenue derived from the rapidly expanding mobile sector. In contrast, Elpida had focused intensely on low-power DDR technologies and had achieved what Micron had struggled to do: qualify its chips with Apple. Apple's supply chain is notoriously difficult to penetrate, requiring vendors to meet exacting standards for quality, volume, and supply continuity. Elpida had established itself as a key supplier for the iPhone and iPad, providing the mobile DRAM that powered these flagship devices. Industry analysis from the period indicated that Elpida's memory was present in the iPhone 5 and the iPad 4, and reports suggested that Apple had booked substantial portions of Elpida's Hiroshima output to ensure supply stability. The acquisition of Elpida allowed Micron to inherit this relationship overnight, fundamentally altering its revenue mix. The transition was critical because the center of gravity in computing was shifting decisively from the desktop to the smartphone. Without Elpida, Micron would have been left servicing a stagnant PC market while its Korean competitors cornered the mobile explosion. Following the close of the deal, mobile DRAM quickly grew to account for over 30% of Micron's total DRAM bit shipments, reaching parity with its PC business. This diversification provided a strategic hedge against the cyclicality of the PC market. While PC memory was often a commoditized race to the bottom, mobile memory for flagship devices commanded more stable pricing and required tighter engineering collaboration with OEMs. The acquisition positioned Micron as a top-tier supplier to the mobile ecosystem, placing it within striking distance of SK Hynix in terms of market share. Post-acquisition data showed Micron holding approximately 22 to 23% of the mobile DRAM market, narrowing the gap with the Korean giants. The integration of Elpida represented a significant cultural experiment. It involved merging a distinctly American manufacturing ethos, born in the high desert of Idaho and forged in the cutthroat pricing wars of the 1980s, with a Japanese corporate structure that carried the legacy of NEC and Hitachi. The success of this integration was by no means guaranteed. The history of cross-border semiconductor mergers is riddled with failures due to clashing engineering methodologies and management styles. However, Micron managed to execute a relatively seamless integration, retaining key talent and intellectual property from the Elpida team. This infusion of engineering prowess was instrumental in Micron's subsequent roadmap. The Hiroshima facility specifically became a center of excellence for Micron's mobile DRAM development. The technical synergies began to manifest in the acceleration of LPDDR4, where Micron was able to leverage Elpida's low-power architecture expertise, combined with its own process technology scaling. This successful assimilation laid the groundwork for the Supercycle that would follow in 2017 and 2018, as Micron finally possessed the scale and product mix to capitalize on global demand across all computing sectors. 3D XPoint ambition and the strategic divorce from Intel, 2015 to 2021. With its position in the DRAM market stabilized by the Elpida acquisition, Micron embarked on an ambitious quest to invent a completely new category of memory. In July 2015, Micron and its longtime partner Intel announced 3D XPoint, pronounced Crosspoint, a non-volatile memory technology that promised to revolutionize computing architecture. The technology was heralded as the first new class of memory introduced in decades, claiming to be 1,000 times faster than NAND flash and 10 times denser than DRAM. The theoretical value proposition of 3D XPoint was compelling. In the traditional memory hierarchy, there was a massive latency gap between the system's main memory, DRAM, which is fast but volatile and expensive, and storage, NAND SSDs, which is non-volatile and cheap but relatively slow. 3D XPoint was designed to fill this void, serving as storage class memory, SCM. It utilized phase-change material, chalcogenide glass, rather than transistors to store data, relying on bulk material properties to switch states. This allowed for bit addressability and incredible endurance compared to NAND, theoretically enabling new computing paradigms where data could persist in memory without the bottleneck of writing to disk. Despite the engineering marvel that 3D XPoint represented, the commercialization phase revealed deep fissures in the strategy. The technology was developed under the IM Flash joint venture, but Intel and Micron had divergent strategic goals. Intel, branding the technology as Optane, viewed it as a mechanism to lock customers into its Xeon processor ecosystem. By creating proprietary interfaces and requiring specific Intel CPUs to utilize Optane DC persistent memory, Intel sought to strengthen its data center dominance. Micron, conversely, was a merchant memory supplier. It needed a broad market with standard interfaces to drive volume and profitability. However, the ecosystem for a new memory tier failed to materialize quickly enough. The cost structure of 3D XPoint remained stubbornly high compared to NAND, which was simultaneously undergoing a revolution of its own with the transition to 3D vertical stacking. As 3D NAND scaled to 64, 96, and eventually 128 layers, the cost per bit dropped precipitously, making the value proposition of the expensive 3D XPoint harder to justify for general-purpose storage. The Lehigh, Utah fabrication plant, which was dedicated to 3D XPoint, became a financial albatross for Micron. The fab suffered from chronic underutilization because demand for the exotic memory did not match the facility's immense output capacity. By 2021, Micron was reporting losses of approximately $400 million annually related to the underloading of the Lehigh fab. The specialized nature of the equipment and the material physics involved made it difficult to simply repurpose the lines for standard memory without massive investment. The divergence in strategy led to the slow-motion breakup of the Intel-Micron alliance. In 2018, the companies announced they would cease joint development of 3D XPoint after the second generation. Micron eventually exercised its right to buy out Intel's stake in the IM Flash joint venture, taking full control of the Lehigh facility. This left Micron in the precarious position of being the sole manufacturer of a technology for which its primary competitor, Intel, was the only major customer. Micron attempted to develop its own 3D XPoint products, such as the X100 SSD, aimed at high-performance data center applications. However, without a proprietary CPU platform like Intel's Xeon to leverage the memory bus, Micron was forced to rely on the PCIe interface. While fast, the PCIe bus introduced latency bottlenecks that negated some of the raw speed advantages of the underlying XPoint media. Furthermore, the software ecosystem required significant re-architecting to take advantage of persistent memory, a task that application developers were slow to embrace given the high hardware costs. In March 2021, Micron made the difficult strategic decision to cease all development of 3D XPoint and sell the Lehigh fab. This was a tacit admission that the storage-class memory revolution would not be driven by proprietary materials like phase-change memory, but rather by standard interfaces like Compute Express Link combined with standard DRAM or NAND. The exit strategy was executed with characteristic financial discipline. The Lehigh fab was sold to Texas Instruments for $900 million. While this sum was a fraction of the investment poured into the facility over the years, the sale stopped the $400 million annual financial bleeding and allowed Micron to redeploy its capital. This pivot was pivotal for the company's future. It freed up capital and R&D resources that Micron desperately needed to compete in the core DRAM and NAND markets, where Samsung and SK Hynix were pushing the boundaries of layer counts and lithography. It demonstrated a corporate governance willing to kill cool technology when the path to profitability disappeared, prioritizing long-term financial health over the sunk cost fallacy. Industrial Espionage and the Awakening to Geopolitical Risk, 2016 to 2022. While Micron navigated the technological complexities of 3D XPoint, it was simultaneously fighting a war on a different front, the theft of its intellectual property. The events that unfolded between 2016 and 2022 served as a wake-up call regarding the vulnerability of American semiconductor trade secrets and the aggressive ambitions of the Chinese semiconductor industry. The central drama involved United Microelectronics Corporation, UMC, a Taiwanese foundry, and Fujian Jinhua Integrated Circuit Co., Jinhua, a Chinese state-backed enterprise. In 2016, UMC entered into a cooperation agreement with Fujian Jinhua to develop DRAM technology. Since UMC was primarily a logic foundry and lacked indigenous DRAM intellectual property, it turned to poaching talent for Micron's Taiwan subsidiary, Micron Memory Taiwan, MMT. The operation was centered around Stephen Chen, the former site director of MMT, who left to become a senior executive at UMC and later the president of Fujian Jinhua. The indictment and subsequent court findings revealed a systematic operation where Chen and other poached engineers, including J.T. Ho and Kenny Wang, extracted massive amounts of confidential data from Micron servers before their departure. This included intricate design rules, manufacturing processes for 25-nanometer DRAM, and IP relating to next-generation 1X nanometer technology, secrets valued between $400 million and $8.75 billion. The methods employed were brazen. Engineers downloaded hundreds of confidential files, including PDF documents and complex Excel spreadsheets detailing fabrication steps onto USB drives and personal cloud accounts. They then utilized off-network laptops at UMC to sanitize the data and integrate it into the Fujian Jinhua project, effectively allowing the Chinese entity to bypass years of R&D and billions of dollars in investment. Micron responded with a ferocious legal counteroffensive, suing UMC and Jinhua in both California and Taiwan. The United States Department of Justice, DOJ, took up the case as part of its China Initiative, viewing it as a paradigmatic example of state-sponsored economic espionage. In 2018, the U.S. Department of Commerce placed Fujian Jinhua on the Entity List, effectively cutting it off from U.S. semiconductor equipment and crippling its ability to manufacture chips. UMC eventually pleaded guilty in 2020 to trade secret theft, agreeing to pay a $60 million fine and cooperate with the DOJ's prosecution of Fujian Jinhua. This plea was a significant victory for Micron, validating its claims that its technology had been stolen to fuel China's semiconductor ambitions. The fine, while substantial, was reduced from a potential maximum of $20 billion, reflecting UMC's cooperation. However, the legal saga concluded with a surprising twist in the U.S. courts. In February 2024, following a bench trial, U.S. District Judge Maxine Chesney acquitted Fujian Jinhua of economic espionage charges. The court ruled that federal prosecutors had failed to prove that the Chinese company itself, as a corporate entity, had misappropriated the secrets, distinguishing between the actions of the individuals/UMC and the specific intent of Fujian Jinhua. Despite this acquittal, the strategic damage to Fujian Jinhua had already been inflicted. The sanctions had stalled its roadmap, and Micron had successfully signaled to the global industry that it would aggressively defend its IP. This episode fundamentally altered Micron's risk calculus. It highlighted that Micron was no longer just competing in a market, it was a combatant in a geopolitical struggle. The theft underscored the stranglehold or choke point nature of memory technology. China needed it, couldn't easily build it, and was willing to use gray zone tactics to acquire it. Technological independence and the 176-layer breakthrough, 2019 to 2023. Following the dissolution of the Intel partnership and the stabilization of the IP theft crisis, Micron entered a period of intense technological execution. The company needed to prove it could lead the industry without a partner. This era was defined by two major technical pivots: the transition to replacement gate technology in NAND and the 1-beta node in DRAM. For years, the NAND flash industry relied on floating gate technology to store electrical charges. However, as manufacturers stacked more layers of cells to increase density, floating gate cells faced physical limitations regarding cell-to-cell interference and aspect ratios. While competitors like Samsung and SK Hynix had transitioned to charge trap architectures earlier, Micron, in its partnership with Intel, had stuck with floating gate longer. In 2020, Micron executed a flawless pivot to its own version of replacement gate technology, which it termed replacement gate, or RG. The debut of its 176-layer 3D NAND was a watershed moment. This technology did not just catch up to competitors, it leapfrogged them. The 176-layer NAND utilized a CMOS under-array architecture, where the logic circuitry controlling the memory was built directly underneath the memory stack rather than alongside it. This reduced the die size by approximately 30%, allowing Micron to fit more gigabytes per wafer than its rivals. The 176-layer node offered a 35% improvement in read-write latency over the previous generation and established Micron as the leader in layer count density. This technical leadership was critical for capturing share in the booming data center SSD market, where performance density translated directly to total cost of ownership savings for hyperscalers. In the DRAM sector, the industry was facing the limits of optical lithography. As features shrank below 10 nanometers, companies like Samsung and SK Hynix began integrating extreme ultraviolet lithography machines costing $150 million each into their production lines. Micron, however, chose a contrarian path. For its 1-alpha and subsequent 1-beta nodes introduced in 2022, Micron eschewed EUV. Instead, it relied on advanced proprietary multi-patterning techniques and immersion lithography. Critics initially viewed this as a risk, fearing Micron would fall behind. Instead, the strategy proved brilliant. By delaying the massive capital expenditure of EUV integration, Micron achieved a 15% power efficiency improvement and a 35% bit density increase with its 1-beta node, delivering the world's most advanced LPDDR5X memory to mobile customers. This approach allowed Micron to maintain cost competitiveness while maturing its EUV processes in the background for the future 1-gamma node. The ability to deliver the 1-beta node without EUV was described by Thi Tran, Micron's VP of DRAM process integration, as challenging the laws of physics, and demonstrated that Micron's internal R&D engine was firing on all cylinders, independent of external partnerships. China ban and supply chain resilience, 2023 to 2024. In May 2023, the geopolitical tensions that had been simmering since the Fujian Jinhua incident boiled over. The Cyberspace Administration of China, CAC, announced that Micron's products had failed a cybersecurity review and banned operators of critical information infrastructure in China from purchasing Micron goods. The ban was widely interpreted by international observers as a retaliatory measure against U.S. export controls imposed in October 2022, which restricted China's access to advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment. Micron was an ideal target. It was a recognizable American brand, but one whose products, memory chips, could be substituted by Korean competitors Samsung and SK Hynix, minimizing disruption to Chinese domestic manufacturing. The immediate financial impact was significant. Micron disclosed that approximately half of its revenue from China-headquartered customers was at risk, equating to a low double-digit percentage of its worldwide revenue. In fiscal year 2023, the ban, combined with a broader inventory correction in the memory market, contributed to a revenue decline, where sales were nearly halved year over year. However, Micron's response was not to retreat, but to accelerate its diversification. The ban forced Micron to decouple its growth story from the Chinese domestic market. While it continued to serve non-critical sectors in China, it aggressively pivoted its supply chain. In June 2023, Micron announced a landmark investment of up to $825 million to build a new assembly and test facility in Gujarat, India. This move into India was strategic on multiple levels. It leveraged the Indian government's Modified Assembly, Testing, Marking, and Packaging scheme, which provided substantial fiscal support, covering up to 70% of the project cost when combined with state incentives. It also placed Micron at the forefront of the China Plus One strategy, creating a supply chain node immune to Beijing's regulatory whims. The Sanand, Gujarat facility was fast-tracked, moving from a greenfield site to clean room readiness in record time, with shipments of packaged DRAM and NRAND expected to begin reaching international customers by 2026. AI Supercycle and HBM3E dominance, 2023 to present. As the consumer electronics market struggled in 2023, a new, voracious source of demand emerged that would rewrite the economics of the memory industry: generative artificial intelligence. Large language models like GPT-4 required massive amounts of high-performance memory to run inference and training. The bottleneck for AI accelerators was no longer just compute, but memory bandwidth. High bandwidth memory, or HBM, which stacks DRAM dies vertically and connects them with through-silicon vias, or TSVs, became the most valuable commodity in the semiconductor world. While SK Hynix had an early lead in this sector due to its partnership with NVIDIA, Micron executed a stunning acceleration of its roadmap to catch up. In early 2024, Micron commenced volume production of its HBM3E solution. The specifications were industry-leading, a pin speed greater than 9.2 gigabits per second, delivering over 1.2 terabytes per second of bandwidth per cube. Crucially, Micron's HBM3E was approximately 30% more power efficient than competing offerings from SK Hynix and Samsung. In the context of data centers, where power budgets are the primary constraint on scaling AI clusters, this efficiency advantage was a massive differentiator. The definitive validation of Micron's technology came with the announcement that its 24GB 8-high HBM3E cubes would be integrated into NVIDIA's H200 Tensor Core GPUs. This broke the SK Hynix monopoly on NVIDIA's premium AI accelerators. Furthermore, Micron moved quickly to sample 36GB 12-high stacks, positioning itself for the next generation of Blackwell and AMD MI350 platforms. The financial implications of this pivot were profound. By fiscal Q4 2025, Micron's revenue had surged nearly 50% year-over-year to a record $37.4 billion. The data center segment, driven by AI demand, grew to account for 56% of total revenue, a complete inversion of the company's historical reliance on PCs and mobile. The AI supercycle had allowed Micron to transcend the traditional commodity cycle. It was now selling a specialized, high-margin component critical to the world's most advanced computing infrastructure. Micron's ability to win in HBM3E was not a fluke, but the result of the foundational work done during the 1-beta node development. Because Micron had optimized its 1-beta process for power efficiency, originally for mobile applications, that same process technology conferred a thermal advantage when applied to HBM stacks. The company's advanced packaging innovations allowed for better thermal impedance, meaning heat could dissipate more effectively from the dense stacks of DRAM. This technical lead translated into market share. By late 2025, analysts noted that while SK hynix still held the majority share of the HBM market, Micron was rapidly eating into Samsung's share and had firmly established itself as the second premium supplier, leaving Samsung scrambling to catch up on qualification for NVIDIA's latest chips, new geography of silicon, and the CHIPS Act. The final piece of Micron's modern evolution is its role as the vanguard of the United States semiconductor manufacturing renaissance. The passage of the CHIPS and Science Act in 2022 provided the necessary legislative and financial framework for Micron to undertake the largest industrial expansion in the history of the U.S. memory sector. In October 2022, Micron announced a plan to invest up to $100 billion over the next 20-plus years to build a semiconductor manufacturing complex in Clay, New York. This project represents a generational shift in U.S. industrial policy. The facility is designed to bring leading-edge DRAM manufacturing back to American soil, ensuring that the U.S. military and critical infrastructure are not 100% dependent on Asian supply chains for memory chips. While construction timelines have shifted due to market conditions and environmental reviews, with the first fab now expected to be operational around 2030, the commitment remains firm. The project is supported by over $6 billion in direct CHIPS Act funding, highlighting the U.S. government's view of Micron as a strategic national asset. Micron's footprint is now a carefully balanced geopolitical portfolio. It retains massive R&D and pilot manufacturing in Boise, Idaho, which is also expanding. It has high-volume manufacturing in Taiwan, the legacy of Rexchip and Inotera, and Singapore, NAND Center of Excellence. It has a growing back-end presence in India to offset risks in China, and it is building the long-term fortress in New York. This diversification is expensive and complex, but it provides a resilience that few competitors can match. In an era where a blockade of the Taiwan Strait is a non-zero probability, Micron's ability to manufacture advanced memory in the US and Japan, Hiroshima, offers a security premium that Western governments and defense contractors value highly. From 2013 to the present, Micron technology has navigated a labyrinth of challenges that would have sunk a less disciplined company. It began the decade by swallowing Elpida to survive the commodity wars. It spent the middle years attempting to birth a new memory hierarchy with Intel, only to have the wisdom to cut its losses when the economics failed. It endured state-sponsored theft of its crown jewels and retaliatory bans from the world's second-largest economy. Yet it emerged from this crucible stronger. By 2025, it had shed the label of a commodity manufacturer. Its products, 176-layer NAND, 1-beta DRAM, and HBM3E, are sophisticated, differentiated technologies that power the AI revolution. Its balance sheet is fortified, with net leverage well below 1x even amidst massive capital projects. The evidence suggests that Micron has successfully evolved into a geopolitical asset. It is no longer just selling bits, it is selling the capability for the United States and its allies to train AI models, run data centers, and secure communication networks independent of adversarial supply chains. As the industry looks toward 2026 and beyond, facing a potential supply shortage in DRAM caused by the insatiable appetite of AI, Micron stands not as a passive participant in the cycle, but as a primary architect of the silicon future.